I'm Angela Morabito with Campus Reform, and today Congresswoman Kat Cammack from Florida's 3rd District is joining me to answer 5 big questions about higher education and its role in bolstering workforce preparedness and fostering free expression. Congresswoman Cammack is a small business owner and co-chair of the Campus Free Speech Caucus. Congresswoman Cammack, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure. And I want to get us started here by talking about how higher education intersects with the two of the committees you serve on, those being Homeland Security and Agriculture. And a common thread between those is that they really need a skilled workforce. Are our colleges turning out a workforce that we need to fill these jobs? What is the impact there?
Well, I think right now, colleges have really expanded what some of their graduate degrees have ended up being. And some of them are very relevant to the challenges and the needs of our workforce and our industries today, and some not so much. I think that there should be an understanding, or at least just a recognition of, hey, if I'm getting a degree in underwater basket weaving, that probably isn't a in-demand type field. But if you are an engineer, if you are in information operations or technology, if you are in heck, even some of the business and construction industries, anything in science, those are demanded or industries that are in demand. And so I think for right now, we have to focus on really what are the needs and planning long term. When you're a freshman coming in, I think the world is your oyster and you really kind of don't even know necessarily what you want to do with your life. But once you get those general ed courses out of the way, you can start to specialize. And if you look at what's coming down the pipe, it is amazing, some of the opportunities that are out there. Cybersecurity, we need any kind of engineer. We have such a demand in this country for really the trades. And it is incredible how well a person can do in the trades, in these critical industries that have been identified as critical to national security. And as you mentioned, I sit on both agriculture and on Homeland. 1% of the population is feeding the world, not just our communities in our state or our nation, but the world. And today, agriculture is not like it was 50 years ago. This is high-tech precision agriculture. So I am just so excited about the opportunities that are out there. And I think really, if you have a passion for something, it can be applicable to really serve our nation. But if it's an underwater basket weaving degree, probably not so much.
There's a ton of great opportunities out there, and I know that will be very welcome news to our student audience here at Campus Reform. But I want to address that when we talk about global competitiveness, we really have to start in grade school. And I'm sure you're aware, if you look at the results on the PISA exam, which measures the US against other developed countries, we're below average in math, and our 15-year-olds are about 4 years behind the average Chinese student in how much math they're able to do. So we're falling behind here. What needs to be done to correct course?
So there's a couple of things that need to happen. We've seen really through the pushing of Common Core and standardized testing where teachers were teaching more to the test than they were actual material and giving students that critical thinking skill that is so necessary in all of life aspects. So one of the things that we need to focus on is really teaching students how to think, not what to think, because we need to start producing more problem solvers. And again, we need to move away from the teaching of the test. We have taken so many of the core elements of what an education is and should be and replaced it with nonsense like this critical race theory that is teaching kids how to be hateful, and it's very, very dangerous. And then you look beyond that, we also have been known historically as Americans as really the creative mindset, the creative problem solvers. It's called the CQ, the creative quotient. And for years, nations like China and Russia and India and really all around the world, they would send their students to the United States to bolster their CQ, their creative quotient, because there's such an emphasis on the IQ in some of these other nations, but they tend to lack when it comes to creative problem solving. And more than ever, when we have these unique situations, we need creative problem solvers. So it's really a twofold of getting back to the basics, getting back to really teaching the foundational aspects of an education, and then encouraging students and bolstering that creative quotient side of their brain that's going to allow them to be really complete adults and functioning members of society, where they have common sense, take a pragmatic approach to things, and really use that creative quotient that we've been developing in this country for so long, but is slowly starting to see its way getting weeded out.
And you raise a very interesting point about critical race theory. And I know you're a very proud alum of the Naval War College. So I wanted to ask you about critical race theory in the service academies. General Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before Congress just recently that he thinks CRT is a good thing and that it should continue to be taught as we prepare our troops for their future careers. But then he described it as just reading authors that you disagree with. So when you hear that, what goes through your head? Do you think he has the right description? Do you think he's on the right track? What should be happening in the service academies with regard to critical race theory?
I think there's a very big difference between reading to understand, say, Mao Zedong or Stalin or Lenin, right? But we don't implement what they write about. We don't implement their practices and their ideology in our curriculum. That's what critical race theory is doing. So the notion that was mentioned in that hearing, we saw that very fiery exchange. When we talk about generals and higher leadership in the United States military subscribing to this woke ideology, the curriculum and the books that I have actually seen that are part of this, department-wide stand down. This isn't just, hey, we're reading to understand it. It's, hey, we're reading it so we can implement it. That is the key difference. We don't see people and our military leaders reading Mao and the Little Red Book and then implementing it. They're reading it to understand so they can really understand the battlefield, if you will, and the ideology, because much of warfare is understanding that ideology and the cultural differences. But when we are implementing that and making changes based on a very hateful, very dangerous rhetoric and this narrative that inherently Americans and white Americans are racist, that's very, very dangerous. We're implementing this as part of what the military should be. That is why there's such a pushback and a blowback on this. Over the weekend, I was sitting with General Eifert from the Florida National Guard, and it was very concerning when he talked about how they have been talking about this issue. And while everyone acknowledges that extremism is bad, they're seeing this push where members of the military are being made to apologize for something that they're not. We have incredible men and women who make up our armed services and our armed forces. And we ought to really respect where they have come from and what they do for our country, rather than shove some random radical ideology down their throat and completely blasting all of them with a broad brush of, hey, if you're white, you're racist. It's very, very dangerous. And when it comes down to it, the military for the longest time has been kind of separate from the rest of culture, right? It has been its own culture that has really been protected from a lot of the societal issues that we've had. And that's really a shame that this movement in society, in pop culture, in the mainstream is starting to bleed into the armed services, where for a long time, it was just its own entity where everyone was equal, and we were always fighting for the flag, for America as Americans, not white versus black, but as Americans. And that's what we need to get back to.
That woke doctrine that you describe is under fire in your state of Florida, with Governor DeSantis signing bills saying that you may not shield students at a public college from free speech activities. In short, there are no more safe spaces. And while we've already seen some very vocal opposition to that, of people saying, no, I have the right to set parameters over what I see and hear and experience, you also have the other side that's saying, finally, I'm 18 years old, going off to college, please treat me like an adult. So you've got these two competing perspectives here. I know the University of Florida is right in your backyard. What would you say the ultimate impact is on Florida's public colleges as a destination, not just for Floridians, but for students from out of state?
Well, it's exciting. Congressman Jim Jordan and I just recently formed the Campus Free Speech Caucus because for the longest time we have seen conservatives being shouted out and shouted at and shouted down. And really, this notion of free spaces, of free speech spaces on campus, that's a misnomer. They are publicly, especially our tax-funded ones, our public universities, they're funded by taxpayer dollars. Therefore, they need to respect the First Amendment. Now, respecting the First Amendment doesn't mean you have to agree with someone's opinions, and you absolutely have the right to be offended by those opinions. Let's be clear, there is a difference between hate speech, right? Violent hate speech that is threatening or harassing in some way, threatening violence or something against another person. But when someone is talking generally as a Republican or as a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal, those are robust debates that need to be had on our college campuses. We should stop treating college kids as though they live in a plastic bubble, because the minute they graduate, the real world is going to smack them in the face. And we need to be preparing our young adults for that. And so I think this is a fantastic move. We need to restore some sanity on our college campuses and recognize that the behavior that has been exhibited for almost a decade now on these college campuses, where people are shouting others down, threatening conservatives, only allowing quote unquote free speech in small designated areas of campus, that's not reality. We need to create a place where students can really understand their positions, have those debates, really understand the issues. This is what is needed more than ever. We need to stop going from one extreme to the other. And this is a step in the right direction to do that.
The real world does hit hard for some recent grads, both in terms of free speech, but also in terms of the bills, in terms of student debt. President Biden campaigned on forgiving $10,000 for every borrower. You have others who are pushing him to forgive $50,000 or even all of it. Let's take this to a macro level here. If any amount of student loan debt is forgiven, what do you forecast will happen to this country's economy and to the higher ed industry?
Well, we're already seeing what happens when we have Americans under hyperinflation. We're already at 2% sequestration across the federal government. And this notion of really forgiving any kind of student debt, if I as an individual make the choice to incur student loans and therefore student debt, that is my responsibility. I sign a piece of paper saying that is my responsibility. And I don't expect taxpayers across the country to be responsible for my decisions. That is not what happens in a free constitutional republic. So the notion that we are talking about forgiving the debt of any student is ridiculous. And it's actually a little bit hypocritical, because the minute those students graduate college and then their student loan debt gets forgiven, they're going to be paying higher taxes to pay for it anyways. So rather than actually put the burden on your fellow man and woman, fellow American, who are then paying for the decisions that you have made to get whatever degree you so desire, that should be the burden and the responsibility of the individual. It's part of growing up. It's part of becoming an adult. You sign that piece of paper saying you are going to repay those student loans. And it's your choice whether or not you try to go out and get scholarships and really work throughout college the way that I did to pay off student loan debt. That is something that is a cornerstone of who we are as Americans, is really giving the opportunity for someone to better themselves and create a better life for themselves. I think that opportunity exists for everyone at whichever level you want to do it at, be it a community college, be it at an undergraduate university. If you want to go get your master's, you have all the space and opportunity in the world to do that. But you can't expect Americans across the country to pay for your decision and your actions. It's not right. And I think that goes against the notion that America is about equal opportunity, not equal outcome. So I think there are smarter ways that we can provide relief when it comes to some of the debt that students have racked up. But it's also, again, coming back to that personal individual responsibility that we all as Americans have to make decisions and choices every single day that impact the outcome of our lives and our future.
The American dream looks a little different for everyone, and that means there's so many different ways to get there. I so appreciate you calling attention to these issues. Congresswoman Kat Cammack, thank you again for joining me.